almost 100 years ago, the great car manufacturer Henry Ford was involved in a libel action against a Chicago newspaper. I'm not sure of all the circumstances, and I'm not sure of the immediate context in which he made this statement. But during his time in the witness box, during this trial, he made this statement. He said, history is bunk. In other words, history is rubbish. History doesn't matter. What do you make of that statement? Was he right? I see some people shake their heads. Does history matter?
It does, yeah.
History is important.
Yeah.
Actually, it was one of my favourite, probably my favourite subject at school. Still is something that I enjoy very much. I would disagree profoundly with that statement. And I think, I sense from your reaction that you do too. What is the value of history? Why is history important?
You learn in it, so you don't make big mistake in the future.
Good. Okay, so one of the important values of history is the opportunity to learn. Very often you learn from people's mistakes. Now, sometimes people don't learn from those mistakes. There is a statement that if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, we are doomed to repeat those mistakes. And that's happened in history. It's happened in individual life as well. Okay, so that's one important value of history. Anything else? Any other ways in which history is important, it's valuable?
It gives us a way to. You see, it's really more than learning. You see some examples that are happening to us.
Yes.
And we sort of have the idea of how to cope with that. But it's a learning, but it's also like even good things.
Yeah.
We are sure that they work then, they can work today. So
Okay.
we're prepared to keep passing in our life. So
Oh,
maybe it's into learning.
Okay, all right. There certainly can be that sense of that encouragement from the way that things have happened in the past. There is a sense in which history helps us to make sense of the present. You know, if we ignore the past, if we don't learn from the past, actually the present doesn't make a great deal of sense. And then that has impact for the future as well. History is also important in terms of a sense of identity. Very, very important, a sense of identity. If we don't understand where we've come from, if we don't understand what's going on before us, that can create a crisis of identity. So those are all very important aspects of history, the value of history. And this morning we're going to, in a sense, we're going to look at the history of God's dealings with people. And I would like to look at these dealings. We're going to chart a timeline, if you like. But there's various themes that are going to emerge as we look at this history. Green one, thanks. There's going to be the concept of law, the concept of grace, the concept of trust or belief, and the theme of judgment. Okay, so those are themes that are going to appear again and again. Law, grace, trust or belief, and judgment. And basically, under underpinning them all is the gospel. Okay, so those are the things that we're going to look at this morning. We're going to start first of all with the Garden of Eden. Okay. So let's go right back to the Garden of Eden. Our first parents, Adam and Eve. Let's consider this first of all. Were there any laws in place when Adam and Eve were created? Were they aware of any laws during their experience?
Yeah, there was actually, yeah.
Okay, say very, yeah, okay, well what were they? What were those laws?
Well, the fruit of the tree.
Okay, very,
Yep.
okay, very. What did God say in relation to the tree?
To not eat it, to not partake of having that. Yeah.
Not to eat the fruit of that particular tree. What was that tree called?
Knowledge of the good and evil.
Knowledge of good and evil. So even by the name of that tree, there's right and wrong. The knowledge of good and evil. So that was a very clear law, if you like. Don't do it. We'll explore that a bit more in a minute or two. Were there any other laws in place?
Not yet, anyway. No.
Creation, the seventh day, we rested.
Okay. What was actually the first full day that Adam and Eve lived? It was the Sabbath. And what were they to do in the Sabbath? To rest. So if you like, there was a law in place there. If you turn to Genesis chapter 2. Genesis chapter 2 and verse 15. Okay, so would someone read that verse, please? Genesis 2 and verse 15.
And the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it.
Okay, so Adam was given an assignment, to work, to take care of the garden. But as we've seen, he wasn't to work every day. He was, there was that command, if you like, to rest on the seventh day, on the Sabbath. So yes, the very fact that he was given work to do, there were obviously, if you like, principles of stewardship there, responsibility. So right at the outset, in the Garden of Eden, there were laws in place. Maybe weren't spelled out so specifically, so directly, but they were in place. Now, what sort of relationship did Adam and Eve enjoy with God at that time? When they were created, what sort of relationship did they enjoy with God? They were able to meet them. Yep. They were able to talk with God face to face. They were able to enjoy the access and the relationship that you and I are enjoying this morning. Able to talk directly, face to face. That's what they were able to do. But they were told that if they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, what would happen? They would die. They would die. Had Adam and Eve ever experienced what death was like? When God told them, "You will die," do you think they understood what death was?
Maybe they.
I don't think they
didn't
would.
realize it. What kind of what is that?
Yeah.
They had the sense of negative, but they didn't know what.
Okay.
How bad.
I guess we are guessing here, but they would have understood. Okay, this isn't
No.
good. This is negative. But I don't think they would have understood really what is death. And so, that's where this comes into.
Make it trust.
They had to trust God. They had to believe that God was telling the truth. That God was saying, don't do this, because if you do, you will die. And I know we're probably guessing a little bit here, but they really wouldn't have fully understood what death meant because they'd never seen it. They had never been exposed to it.
They never experienced, like little children, when they don't experience something, they just have to trust their parents. Don't touch that because you burn.
Good point. What their relationship to God was like a child to his or her parents. To take God at His word. All right. So, in terms of it, if you like, in terms of a timeline experience, here we start at the pinnacle. There's face-to-face direct communion with God. Okay, that's what they were created for. But they were told that if this didn't, if they ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that they would die. So that's where trust comes into the picture. All right. Let's look at Genesis 3 and verses 1 and 2. Okay. Would someone read those two verses, please? Genesis 3, verses 1 and 2.
Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God actually say, 'You shall not eat of any tree in the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden, but God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.'" Okay.
Notice what the serpent said. Do you notice anything interesting in what the serpent said about God's instruction?
He asked her to repeat the instruction.
Yes. Yes. So there's that element of repeating God's instruction. Good. But in what way did the serpent present God's instruction?
It was kind of like doubt.
Yes.
Like think about it. Do you really?
Did he really say that?
Yeah. Did he really say
Did he really say that? Yep. So there's the element of doubt. Notice he also said, did God say you can't eat of any tree in the garden? No. Had God said that? God didn't say. He's almost giving the impression, is God stopping you from eating of any tree in the garden? But God hadn't said that.
He twisted it.
He twisted it. God had actually provided for them to eat of any tree in the garden apart from one. So you see the way that it was twisted, so that it made it very negative. It almost gave the appearance that God had stopped them from enjoying of any tree. Whereas in fact God had provided for them abundantly. However, there was one tree that was out of bounds. So there was doubt. There was, okay, you repeat back to me what God said. There's a twisting taking place here. Now, in Eve's response, did she understand God's command?
Mm-hmm.
She did.
She repeated very well.
She repeated it very well. She did understand. However, she did add one thing. We're not allowed to touch it. Now, I don't know if there's any significance in that. God didn't say anything about touching the tree. So I'm not sure if that's a significant point or not. But I think what we can say overall, that Eve, from her reply, understood God's instruction. She knew that God had provided for them to eat of any tree in the garden apart from the one in the middle of the garden. And that there were consequences if you ate of that. Okay? Alright then, let's come to the temptation. verse 4. Would someone read that verse, please? Genesis 3 and verse 4.
And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die.
Okay. Can you read verse 5 as well, please?
For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil.
Okay. All right. What is the significance of that temptation?
He really said the truth, so about in this
There's-
statement. That
Okay.
He said the truth,
Yep.
but
There's an issue of truth here.
Yeah.
You're right. There's an issue of truth here. What had God said would happen if they ate of the tree of knowledge of good and evil?
That they will surely die.
They would die. What's the serpent saying?
That it's not so.
That you're not going to die.
But
Okay,
that's
so-
not the way.
All right. So there's
Interpretation.
this is very there's definite opposition here. God has said you're going to die. The serpent says no you won't. In actual fact, if you eat of this fruit, you'll become like God. Okay. And so basically, what was the serpent saying? What was the serpent saying about God? Well, basically, what was the devil saying about
They
God?
could be like God. There was no difference between them and God.
Okay, so he was holding out the prospect to Adam and Eve of being like God. What was he actually saying about God's word?
They're not true.
Yeah, he said that that's not true.
That's right.
But he twisted it.
Of course.
They didn't die straight away.
Of course,
They
yeah.
died after.
But basically the devil, through the serpent, was saying, you can't trust God. You can't believe God. God is actually telling you a lie. And he's got an agenda. He doesn't actually want you to be like him. He's actually keeping something back from you. That's what made this temptation so significant, so profound. Okay? This idea of trust and belief. And that's what Adam and Eve were called to do. They were called, in this particular instance, they were asked to trust God. They were asked to believe what God said. Even though at that stage they had not been exposed to death, they possibly really didn't understand what death was about, but they were called to trust God. And you know what happened. They did. Sadly, they did. Where's the
I always question in myself, why? Because God basically, by putting this tree, granted freedom to man.
Yes.
And that's what really, I think that's the key why we don't get it. Because he didn't want us to fail.
No.
But he didn't want us one day to tell him, you did not give us option. We
Yes.
had to follow you.
Yes.
So I think that Satan didn't get himself. Otherwise he would still be with God.
Yes.
That trust, belief. So because it's a bit strange to think, why did God need to put that tree there?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that I gave myself this answer, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a choice, the choice that we have to follow or not follow. From the beginning. They might not be aware of death,
Yes.
but by God saying to them, if you eat, you die, He just gave them, choices.
That's right. I think we are dealing here with an element of mystery, and what you've said, Ursula, that particular point has been the subject of debate and discussion in every generation.
It makes me feel, powerless.
Oh, yeah, I know, I understand, and I feel the same way. I think one of the ways in which we can begin to understand it is this concept of freedom, that God cares about our freedom, and that in actual fact, love is only genuine, love is only meaningful in an atmosphere of freedom. I think we understand that a little bit as parents. We desire the love of our children, but we want that love to be voluntary. We want that, we don't want our children to obey us because they're forced to, because they have no choice. And if that's true for human parents, it's even more the case with God. But of course, with freedom, with choice, there is the possibility that people make bad choices, wrong choices. And Adam and Eve did. They did. And we can very clearly see judgment in the sense that they were banished from the Garden of Eden. They didn't die immediately. I mean, they didn't die physically that day, but they were judged in the sense that they were banished from the presence of God. They lost that ability to talk with God face to face. So there was judgment almost immediately, but there was grace as well. Okay, how in the Adam and Eve sinned, they disobeyed, they ran away from God. Ultimately, they were banished from the Garden of Eden. Where do we see God's grace at work in that situation?
Sacrificing animals.
Yes, very good. Yep.
God had to cover that.
That's right. Good. We see God's grace in a number of ways. Number one, He didn't wait for Adam and Eve to come back to Him. He went out in search of them.
Yeah.
Secondly, before He told them, this is what's going to happen to you, He gave them the promise of a Redeemer. He said there's going to be a rescue. And as you say, that rescue was foreshadowed in a sacrifice, the killing of an animal pointing forward to Jesus. So even, so right at the start, in the Garden of Eden, yes, there was law in place. Adam and Eve had to trust in God's word, even though they maybe didn't have the full picture. Sadly, judgment took place because they disobeyed. But coupled with that judgment was grace, the promise of a Redeemer. Okay? So we see those themes right from the start. Now, they were banished, and look, this is just it's just a picture. But obviously they were banished from the Garden of Eden, and they lost that contact with God. And as we find out, things deteriorated pretty quickly. Adam and Eve had children. And what happened in relation to two of those children?
One killed the other.
That's right. Cain killed his brother. See how quickly things deteriorated? Cain killed his brother. And that actually came down to trusting. Why did Cain kill his brother?
Might jealousy be one of the reasons?
Jealousy was certainly one of the reasons. This element of sacrifice, what did God call them to sacrifice? An animal. Abel brought a sacrifice. What sacrifice did Cain bring? Fruits. The works of his hands. And God didn't accept that. And as a result, because of his jealousy, because of his anger, he killed his brother. Things deteriorated very, very quickly. If you turn to Genesis chapter 4, Genesis chapter 4, and verses 23 and 24. Okay, so Genesis chapter 4 and verses 23 and 24. Someone read those two verses, please.
Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, Hear my voice. You wives of Lamech, listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is sevenfold, then Lamech is 77-fold.
Okay. So, after a few generations, here we have someone boasting of taking revenge. He's actually boasting about the fact that he's killed someone. And he says if Cain is going to be revenged 7 times, well, I'm going to be revenged 77 times. You know, so you see how, and that's after only a few generations. Things have deteriorated very, very quickly. Okay, so it's a downward path. It's a downward path at the moment. And that brings us to the next, I guess the next significant stage, the times of Noah. Okay?
Pastor, I
Yes.
want to ask you one question that before the Cain and Abel,
Yes.
that God not accept that his brother can bring the offering to him. I didn't say that Bible mentioned that, okay, Cain and Abel, both of you have to bring the offering to me according to my desire.
That's
He
right.
didn't say it.
Yeah.
And right now he condemned that one of 2 sons, one is right, one is wrong. I didn't say it. You understand what I mean?
Pastor.
Yeah, I think, okay, we'll come back to that. Yes, Jim? Okay.
Well, I want to mention what James said. I thought the topic was too big and too... practically, some Protestants even, whatever it's not written 100% in the book of Genesis, they assume it never happened. I know a prominent Baptist Protestant who says, why did God not accept Cain's sacrifice, you know? The fact is, the book of Genesis was not a book of law, was not even a book of ceremonial law. But we know from Genesis, what is it, 5:25, that Abraham obeyed laws and statutes. And the fact is, to answer James' question, when God died, when Adam sinned and they left Eden, God gave them all instructions about all the ceremonial law and all the law. Cain did know that the fruit and vegetables were not a good sacrifice. He did know. That's the answer to what he's saying.
Well,
You're saying it's not. It doesn't say that, but it doesn't say many things.
Yeah.
It doesn't say you might not find the commandment you shall not kill, or you might not find the commandment you shall not lie. You will not find the commandment about the Sabbath. You will not find a thorough description of this sacrifice. But it was all given to them, because as soon as they became sinners, they needed the law to know what was right from wrong.
Absolutely, Joe. And well, in Genesis 4 and verse 4, the latter part says, "The Lord looked with favour on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favour." And if you turn to the first letter of John, okay, so from the first book in the Bible through to almost the last book in the Bible, 1 John chapter 3 and verse 12. Okay, would someone read that verse, please? 1 John chapter 3 and verse 12.
We should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. And why did he murder him? Because his own deeds were evil and his brother's righteous.
Okay, you know, makes that clear distinction there. But yet, it doesn't. I don't think it. Well, certainly in the book of Genesis, you'll not find it spelled out. This is why you are to do this. But I think it's very clear from Cain's actions, from Abel's actions, that they understood that this is what they had to do. But Cain Cain disobeyed. You know, there's this element of trust again. God basically said to Adam and Eve and the generations following, as a sign of trust in the Redeemer that I'm going to send, you're to sacrifice an animal. Now, I guess on a human level, maybe that didn't seem to make an awful lot of sense, but there's this element of trust. There's that element of belief.
Humble enough to
Well,
trust
there's
God's
that-
love.
that's-
As we go back to that, that's the bad thing. The bottom.
There's that aspect of pride again.
And the
That's
fact
right.
that nowadays we still think about it, we still have a bit of trouble
Sure.
standing ourselves that
Yeah.
God make
Yeah.
special requests.
Yeah. Good point. Good point. So, anyway, this marks a very a clear decline. It gets even worse. And when we come to the generation of Noah, we find these descriptions of the way things were. Let's just a couple of examples. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5. Someone read that first. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 5.
And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually.
And then verses 11 and 12.
And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we come then to Noah's generation. Was law in place? Were there laws in place at the times of Noah? Yes, there were. Again, not maybe not spelled out specifically in terms of the Ten Commandments, but they were there, because it tells us that the earth was filled with violence, that the earth was corrupt, and so the people were behaving in such a way that were totally at odds with the principles that we find in God's law. Okay, and as Jonah has read for us, things had got so bad that the earth was violent, people were corrupt, and in actual fact their minds were corrupt. So basically we really are at a low point here. In fact, it's got so bad that God says, God actually, He's grieved at the situation. He has to do something about it. And He says, I'm actually going to destroy the earth.
He wasn't that angry probably at the beginning. He was upset more than what happened. Because he said, okay, give another chance.
Yes.
He was hopeful, even
Yes.
if he knew, But
Yeah.
I think that's our human way of seeing it.
I think you put it well. Things have got to such a pitch that God said, this can't go on.
I didn't want to destroy them.
This has got to be, got to stop this. So he told Noah that he is going to destroy the world. He's going to destroy that generation by sending a flood. And he gave Noah instructions to build an ark. Now, where did trust and belief come into? You try to place yourself in Noah's position. How did Noah? What sort of faith did Noah need to display in that sort of situation?
Back then was no rains, and how Noah could build this big boat, like thinking, where it come from, all this water, like.
You've expressed it well. You see, up until that point, there had been no rain. That's right. There had been no. How had the earth been watered?
Well, creation, creation scientists say that the atmosphere was actually different. There was more water in the stratosphere. And then man lived longer. The reason why man lived longer until now because it was more like a buried chamber.
Yes. I think that's true. And it talks about it in the Bible. It talks about a dew watering the earth, a sort of a mist. Okay, but there's no actual
modern
rain.
scientists, the Christian scientists, believe there was something that was in the universe around the earth as well, which was something big
Yes,
that
sure.
has affected the way the earth is today.
Yes.
So it was something we can't understand. But I wanted to go back to Noah.
Yeah.
Why Noah believed? Because he was a father himself.
Yes.
He had children.
Yes.
And he felt that his children he wanted to give them a chance.
Yes.
So he took it.
Yes.
So he didn't feel better than that generation. But I think the opposite vision that we had in the film where they had jumped on Noah was his father.
Yeah.
And it's like he connected the simplest way with God. Just trust, and I have to save them. I want to save them. I have an opportunity.
Yeah.
What future do I give to my kids?
Yeah.
I think that was simple
That was
from his heart. That's why God chose him.
Yeah.
Because he didn't go into too philosophical.
Yes.
I don't think he asked himself many things. He
Yeah.
just went for it.
Yeah.
And in the film, they just make the moment when Russell Crowe is that only moment that I would say what the whole thing had done, because that's a moment when he doesn't know why, but something has to be done.
Yes.
And I think when God speaks to man, he does it in such a powerful way that man had to get to move.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
simple trust.
Okay. So the simple trust. It required faith from the point of view that I think you're right. The earth as it was then compared to now, we're talking about a different earth in a sense. You know, and the atmospheric conditions changed dramatically. But certainly it was a test of faith for Noah to build a structure of this type when there had been no rain before. But the situation had got so bad that something needed to happen. So we see that there's law there, and that generation transgressed those laws. We see Noah's trust. Judgment is very clear in this instance. You know, God did destroy that generation with a flood. How did God's grace operate in that situation? Do you see any evidences of God's grace in the story of Noah?
He saved humanity. He saved, through Noah, saved us. He saved the human kind.
Okay, there's the deliverance of Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives. How long did Noah preach for?
120 days.
Yeah, I think we reckon it's about 120 years. Yeah. Yeah. So judgment didn't come right away.
And everyone was invited to actually get into the ark. So
Yeah.
they all, for 120 years, they heard that God was going to destroy,
Yeah.
and they had to get into the ark. It's just that people chose not to.
Yes. So even in that situation, we see God's grace at work. An opportunity was given, but they made that sad choice. So so things have gone really bad. I mean, really bad. Now this isn't entirely accurate, but okay. So we have the flood. And then actually, in the aftermath of the flood, we have another example of God's grace. What sign did God give? The rainbow. And then isn't it one? I don't know what goes through your mind when you see a rainbow. But I always think of God's promise. You know, God has said He's never going to destroy the world again by that method. So it's actually, sometimes there are advantages in living in a country where there's a lot of rain, because you do see the rainbow. Yeah, and it's an example. It's a visible, powerful sign of God's grace. He said He wouldn't do that again. Not that. So let's say that, okay, Noah and his family are spared. Noah's described as a righteous man, blameless. So now we have a family. Now we have a family that's been delivered, that's been spared. So obviously we're not back to face-to-face communion. We're not back to that level. But there's salvation. There's deliverance. Then notice, but things change again very quickly. Turn to Genesis chapter 11. Okay? Genesis chapter 11. Genesis chapter 11 begins by telling us that everybody at that time had one language and one common speech. I think sometimes it really would be good if we had that. I didn't talk, obviously being an English speaker, I'm spoiled by the fact that English is spoken so widely. But I know I have been in situations, there's no doubt you have obviously, where you're in a country where your language has not been spoken, and it is so frustrating. It is so frustrating trying to make yourself understood. I'm sure you've experienced that many times. So here you have a situation where everybody speaks the same language, and notice what they say to each other in verses 3 and 4 of Genesis chapter 11. Okay, so could someone read those verses, please? Genesis 11, verses 3 and 4.
And they said one another, "Go to, let us make brick and burn them utterly." And they had brick for stone and slim, and they for mortar. Verse 4. And they said, "Go to, let us build us a city and tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, let we be scattered abroad up on the face of the whole earth."
Okay. So what's going on here?
They're acting in rebellion to God's command to populate the earth.
It is, isn't it? You know, they were told to spread over the earth, and here's rebellion. Okay. Again, there's an element. This is talking about trust. They didn't trust. There's actually open rebellion. It's interesting that they say, "Let us make a name for ourselves." What's that about? It's about power. It's about pride, isn't it? So this is actually, again, this is very shortly after the flood. So we're down. We're going down again. In terms of people's relation to God. And again, it happens very quickly. Then we come to the and it says that and really it's very much a case of summarising here. But we come to Abraham. Okay.
So the idea of a power that the waters might not reach is like not trusting in the rainbow, in the promise that God gave. I will not, send a flood again.
Yes.
So here they are trying to avoid another flood.
That's
mismanagement that it was bad.
That's right. That's right. So, there's that lack of trust, that lack of belief, and so it goes on. When we come to Abraham, I'm sorry, our time is such that we sort of need to finish up. When Abraham was 75 years old, living in Ur of the Chaldees, one of the most civilized cities in the world at that time, what was Abraham asked to do?
To leave his land.
He was asked to leave.
His family.
And did he know where he was going? No, he didn't know where he was going. You imagine that. What if your spouse or a friend said to you, "I've been told to leave, but I don't know where I'm going"? Well, you would, wouldn't you? You would, wouldn't you? So there's this element of trust again.
Yeah.
Okay. And he was also told that he would be the father of a great nation. That his descendants would be as the stars of the sky. How many kids did
Not
it?
to get the land, the promised land.
Yeah, so there's land and there's descendants. Okay? When Abraham was given that promise, how many kids did he have? None. He had no kids. Okay? He was 75 years old, Sarah a bit younger, but no kids. 10 years later, at 85, he's still got no kids. And he actually said to God, well, is my servant going to be my heir? And God said, no, you are going to have an heir. And Genesis, if you read Genesis 15 and verse 6. Genesis 15 and verse 6.
And he believed in the Lord, and he counted into him for righteousness.
Yeah, great verse, that one. Depending on your translation, Abraham believed the Lord and he credited to him as righteousness. In other words, Abraham was justified by faith. He trusted God and took God at his word. Even though, he didn't have any kids. His wife was past childbearing age. He still believed. Now, in the next few verses, in the next few chapters, you'll find that Abraham tried to help God. And he had a son through Hagar. And God said, no, you're going to have a son through Sarah. And she when she heard that, she laughed. And Isaac, when the name Isaac actually means laughter, a joke. But you see again that element of trust and belief. Abraham. And so, when you come to the judges and the kings, just a couple of, again, sorry, it's very much a summary here now. You come to the judges. Turn to the book of Judges, and we'll read chapter 3 first of all. So it's Judges chapter 3 and verse 9. Okay? So Judges chapter 3 and verse 9. Well, in fact, maybe you could read verse 7 and verse 9. So if someone could read Judges chapter 3, verse 7, and then verse 9.
And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Asherah.
Verse 9.
But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel who saved them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother.
Okay. And that's a pattern that you find throughout the Judges and throughout the Kings. Basically, the relationship is up and down, up and down, up and down. Sometimes it's really bad.
Historic cycle.
Yeah, very, very much so. There was a cycle. You'll find that the people did evil in the sight of the Lord. They worshipped other gods. As a result, God gave them up to the consequences of their choices. They were oppressed by other peoples. In their distress, they cried out to God. God raised up a deliverer. Things got better for a time, then they forgot God. And the same thing happened. They cried out to God. God raised up a deliverer. Things were better for a time. What happened? They forgot God. And you find this throughout the judges and the kings. And then things got really bad with the exile. Things got so bad that God said, right, The old,
Destroyed
the old,
as a nation.
yeah, they were carried as a nation into exile in Babylon. And yet through all of this, so they disobeyed God's laws, they failed to trust, there was judgment in the sense that they were oppressed by other peoples, and then it got really bad when they were taken into exile. And yet through all of this, God showed grace. Whenever they cried out for help, God responded. Yeah.
I was going to say, a while ago, remember it was summer, and we had a conversation while looking outside. Many people have a problem with the Old Testament where God is actually destroying the inhabitants of the promised land, because the land was not empty when God promised it to Abraham, okay? Now, and we find that we cannot understand this God that is destroying, So there is judgment, but this judgment is for everyone on the earth. It's not just for the Israelites or for the Gentiles or the non-Israelites.
Yes.
So God is God about the whole earth, and there is judgment when we don't behave, okay? Now, there was grace for those people, because how that land was conquered, when Abraham was there, he went about building altars. And for 3 generations, him, his son, and until they actually went to Egypt, they actually conquered the land by giving, witnessing about the true God.
Yeah.
They went about building altars. Abraham never went with force and shooting and whatever.
Sure.
So there was grace, not only for 120 years or 3 generations, there was grace for 400 years after that, because the people of Israel were in Egypt under bondage. So the Canaanites, the inhabitants of that land, had grace, just like the people prior to Noah. Actually, they had longer. And they knew about the true God. They just continue in their evil ways until judgment came.
That's right.
But the same scale was applied to Israel then, as you pointed out. So that because they didn't, although knowing God and receiving, the law and everything through Sinai, they got judgment when exile came, because they refused. So God actually treated everyone the same.
Yes.
And judgment will come to everyone in the same manner.
Yes.
It's not that.
Yes. Yes. And that is true. And that is true today.
Yeah.
Because by way of a summary and then just a few points to close. In Revelation chapter 14, we have, in a sense, God's last message to mankind. And it is the message of the everlasting gospel. So it is a message of grace. It is calling people to trust God, to take Him at His word. It talks about a people who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And one aspect of that message is fear God, give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment has come. So but you notice here, when you go through the history of the world, when you go through the history of God's dealings with mankind, these things have always been present. Law, grace, trusting in God, God's judgment. Those elements have always been there, and so they will remain. Joe.
Anyway, people tend to believe in extremes.
Yes.
Some people judge God. Some people judge God for destroying some populations in the past.
Yes.
Some people believe in eternal hell.
Yes. Yeah. So, yeah. That's right. That's right. There's still a lot of varying views around. That's right. I just want to close with a couple of these thoughts. In Judges chapter 2, we find this very sad verse. Judges chapter 2 and verse 10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what He had done for Israel. Really sad verse. The generation that entered the promised land, that had seen the miracles of God, the next generation didn't know that. In other words, the truth about God, the truth about His character, His will, His ways, This had not been passed on. And that's a very important aspect of what you and I are called upon to do. If you like, we have received the baton from previous generations, and we're called to pass it on, to convey what we have. Very important part of our responsibility as individuals and as a church. You know, a few years ago, I've mentioned this a few times, I had the opportunity to visit different sites in Europe associated with the Reformation. And one of the places that we visited was the church in which John Wycliffe, the English reformer, preached 600 years ago. We happened to be there on a Sunday morning. It's now an Anglican church, and there was a service taking place in that church. The church was actually full. It was actually quite a lively church service. It was really good to be part of it. But, you know, I was thinking whilst I was there, you know, over 600 years ago, this man of God preached in this place. And there's still Christian worship taking place. Now, why has that been? Because generations have passed it on. Now, I'm sure that church has probably had its low points, it's had its difficult times, but it keeps going. And that's what you and I are called to do. And the key aspect in all of this is trusting in God, believing in Him. And that will demonstrate itself in obedience, in service, in action. It did with Noah, it did with Abraham, and it did with all the other heroes. The church in part. Thanks for your feedback this morning, really good. I really appreciate the insights that you've shared. Let's just bow our heads and pray.